What is a paranormal experience you've had? Serious. My family has a cabin next to a lake in Vermont that we spend time at in the summer. One night, while sleeping in the upstairs bedroom, I hear what sounds like someone getting up to go to the bathroom. It was coming from right across the hallway outside my door, so I assumed it was my mom. Usual occurrence. Oddly enough, no lights went on and no bathroom noises. The sound of footsteps just stopped. A minute later, I had this odd feeling that someone was standing at the half-open door to my bedroom, watching me. This feeling went on for minutes until all of a sudden the feeling of someone standing by the door turned into the feeling of someone standing directly over the bed. For the next 5 minutes, I had the terrible feeling that someone/something was looming over me with their face mere inches from mine. The 5 minutes or so seemed to last forever. Suddenly, as soon as the feeling started, it abruptly ended. No retreating footsteps, no noise at all. Whatever it was just gone. The next morning, my family and I are eating breakfast at the table and I still couldn't shake the feeling. Then my sister spoke up and asked, "Mom, what time was it that you got up to go to the bathroom last night? I could hear you up and walking around from the downstairs bedroom." Confused, my mom said that she never got up last night. My brother laughed and said, "Mom, we all heard you." Then my dad piped up and said, "No, your mom never got up." I didn't either. That's when I shared my experience. Freaked everyone out. Back in 1984, when I was 10 years old, I was out shopping with my mother when she suddenly all but collapsed. Some people and I helped her to a nearby seat, and after a few seconds she turned to me and said, "Your grandmother has died." We went home, a 30-minute drive, and upon arrival she learned that her mother had indeed died half an hour before. To this day it's the only inexplicable thing I've ever witnessed, but I have no doubt in my mind that there was some sort of link between the two of them that was broken that day. My sister and I shared a room when we were tweens, and we both swore that it was haunted. We'd hear strange sounds and see weird stuff out of the corner of our eye. There was also an oppressive feeling of something very wrong once the sun went down. My sister and I were way too old to be afraid of the dark, and we were fine with darkness anywhere else. Eventually, my sister refused to sleep in the room. Mom, of course, didn't think there was any possible way we had ghosts and thought this whole thing was ridiculous, until we went to summer camp. We came gone to this story from our mom. We had been gone for a couple of nights. Our dad was working graveyard, so mom had the house to herself. She was getting ready for bed and heard laughter from our room. She heard it a few times before it struck her that we weren't there. Mom checked the room and the lights were on. Mom tried to convince herself that she was imagining things and turned the lights off. She heard the laughter again and she went to check again. The lights were on again. Mom instinctively just said, "You kids go to bed." And she didn't hear them anymore. After that, Mom believed us, but we were still kind of stuck with the room. It was an old house that we had while we were saving up for a better place. My sister adopted a cat which helped for some reason, but it was months before the cat would go into our room without flipping out. Like literally ears pinned back, growling, hissing and bolting out of the room like a bullet. We eventually were able to move to a nice home, and even Mom was too happy to leave. No one ever believes me when I tell this story, but whatever. Back when I was in early 2000s, I went to Mexico with my ex and his family. We went 18 hours into Mexico to visit his sister's in-laws. When we got there, it was a weird experience for me because I'm black and most people in their town had never seen anyone non-Mexican in their entire lives. To say strangers were interested would be an understatement. The third night I was there, I awoke to a feeling I was being watched. I turned over and saw an old Mexican woman staring at me, but not in a malicious way, more like curious or amused like everyone else. At first I thought it was my ex's Mil since we were staying at her house, so I called out to her in Spanish but she didn't answer, and after a few moments, I realized I could see through her. Eventually she walked out the room and I tried to shake it off and go back to sleep but I couldn't. The next morning I told my ex's sister what happened and she says, "Oh, you saw her?" I'm like, "Pardon the fuck?" And she goes on to tell me that while she's never seen La Vieja, her husband has a couple of times. And the last time he saw her, she almost led him to his death. She tells me that one night a few years ago, they were once again visiting his mother and staying in her house. In the middle of the night, her husband wakes up to the feeling he's being watched. He sees a woman that looks a lot like his mother standing in the doorway. He calls out to her, asking why she's awake at this hour, but she doesn't answer. Instead, she walks out of the room and eventually goes outside. Half asleep and in a trance, he follows, calling out to her again and again with no answer. His mother's house is located in the valley between two mountains and is so isolated she still draws her water from a well in her front yard. So, my ex's Bill is following this woman thinking it's his mother and eventually follows her outside. He runs after her and sees her jump directly into the well. Panicked, he begins to jump in thinking he is saving his mother from drowning. But the moment before he jumps in the well, he fully awakes and realizes there's no splash and the water at the bottom was completely still. If he would have jumped in he would have drowned. They have no neighbors and everyone else in the house was asleep. No one would have heard him scream for help. Needless to say, I packed my shit and went home early. Fuck that. Back in college, I was an officer in a student org. Each week, after our allotted time in the student union was up, we'd head to an unlocked lecture hall to keep hanging out. This particular night, most everyone had left, there were just 4 of us remaining, sitting on top of the first row of desks, shooting the shit, making plans. It was sometime between 10:30 and 11 when we heard what sounded like scratching and tapping in the upper right-hand corner of the hall. There was a door up there that was usually locked from the outside, so we figured it was someone on the other side, maybe trying to get in, whatever. Well, the sound didn't stop, it kept on, and it seemed to move along the back wall, and we all started to get this very strange feeling, like the air was being sucked out of the room. Gotta be our minds playing tricks on us, right? Or maybe a small animal got let in at some point, who knows? 2 of us decided to go up and check out that corner. We got about halfway up the stairs when the air in the room changed again. It's difficult for me to describe, especially since it was so long ago, but it sort of felt the way it does right before a storm, like there's static and pressure and tension. We froze. I heard one of the 2 who'd stayed down at the front let out a yelp, and then the tension broke, and this wave of something crashed over us. It made my stomach twist and flip. We turned and ran down the stairs. The others had scrambled off the desks and had backed up to the door, and we all rushed out of it together, completely spooked. Once outside, they told us they'd seen streaks of light shooting out of the corner right before the wave hit. No clue what it could have been. Maybe some sort of electrical discharge, I don't know. But it's the closest thing I've had to an honest-to-goodness paranormal experience. I used to see a little boy in the corner of my room mostly at nighttime when I was about 13 yo. I could see and sense that he wasn't a living human being and his clothes were really old-fashioned. I was never really scared because he always had a positive energy around him, can't really explain it. I talked to him sometimes and he told me his name etc. Can't really remember any of the things he told me anymore. But the most interesting thing happened during a fight between me and my mom. My cousin and her mother were visiting us at the moment and I had never told them about this boy, since ghosts aren't really a light discussion over dinner kind of thing. At some point I had had enough of the fight and got out, slammed the door behind me and for some reason went to a parking garage under our house to chill and cool down for a few hours. My mom, cousin and aunt went looking after me and eventually found me. My cousin told me that she had got the idea to look from the parking garage after she had seen a young blonde boy with weird clothes standing by a fence that was right next to a door to the garage. She told me that the boy just stood there and when he got her attention he jumped over the fence and disappeared. Only that behind the fence there was a thick bush full of big thorns and there is no way a little boy would have just jumped in it and let alone not make a sound after getting stabbed by the thorns. I guess my friendly ghost wanted to help. My grandmother's sister was a nun and she stayed with our family during her last years. She always sat on the terrace of our house, overlooking the garden and streets. She loved staying there as she can watch the people go by. She died when my little brother was like 3 or 4. Terrace wasn't usually used by us ever since no one liked going up there. A year after, little brother and I decided to go up to the damn place. Halfway through the hallway, he stopped, pointed at where our grandma always sat, and asked me, "Who's that? Is that one of our grandmas?" When I was 8 or 9, my family volunteered at a place that basically purchased historical buildings and set them up like a huge outdoor showroom. All the volunteers were dressed up in period clothing for the buildings they staffed, so it was like getting shot straight back to the pioneer days. There were like 7 or 8 kids out there most weeks, so it became a Lord of the Flies situation. One day, we all wandered out into the open land between the show areas, to a place that had this huge great oak tree. I was walking with another girl, who stopped suddenly and froze up. I asked her what was wrong, and she just pointed and said, "Look." There was a beautiful woman there that neither of us had ever seen before, in a purple Victorian dress, and she was dancing by herself. It took us both a second to process, and in that time she had completely faded away. We later found out that a third girl saw her, too. Nobody has any explanation, and she wasn't a volunteer as far as anyone knows. I worked at a haunted house, and once when looking down the hall of one of our actor exits, there stood a figure, like an all-black somewhat transparent silhouette of a human standing, motionless in front of me. I stayed at the hall entrance and called my boss over and asked her to look down the hall, but didn't give any indication that I saw anything so I wouldn't give her a false impression. When she looked, her expression was pure cold fear. "Who the fuck is that?" she said. I told her, "I don't know, but you see him too, right?" "I see through him." "Who the fuck is that?" And before I could say anything more, it came full sprint at us. My boss screamed and ran away, but I was curious what it would do, so I stayed. It got right up to my face and just stopped, inches away from my nose, then suddenly dissipated into thin air. I still occasionally see my boss, and she confirms every time that we saw the same thing, and thinks I was an idiot for staying, but at the same time, it was cool.